All right, Alexander, let's do another update on Durham and a real clear politics article that you sent me, which focuses on Durham, Danchenko, Sergei Millian, who is now taking a pretty prominent role in the unraveling of Russiagate because they tried to put the blame on him for a lot of the stuff when it was in fact Danchenko, and you'll get into that as well as to Sergei Millian's role or lack of a role in Russiagate. But we have some more names popping up in this Real Clear Investigations article, Real Clear Politics, Real Clear Investigations. And that is Bruce Orr is back in the picture. We're starting to learn about Glenn Simpson again. Remember, Fusion GPS. He was kind of the go-between for Clinton, Fusion GPS, and then Steele. He was kind of the middleman, I guess you would say, the conduit. And we also learned that the Durham investigation is massive, or at least that's what it looks like. We're talking about a very, very big investigation. So, to summarize this article, Alexander, let's talk about some of the characters that appear in this article that we've already talked about in the past couple of weeks, and maybe we'll talk about some of the old faces, but new faces with regards to Durham and possible indictments, Bruce Orr, Simpson, these guys.
Yeah. Well, let's first of all talk about Durham, because, I mean, what we learned from this article is that Durham is operating with two different grand juries, one of which appears to be based in Virginia, which is, of course, a state where a lot of the intelligence community is concentrated. Now, it's to be straightforward about it, two grand juries is astonishing, and it suggests an absolutely massive investigation underway, and one which I suspect is going to be targeting before very long members of the intelligence community, which possibly means the FBI. Now, I don't want to start rushing ahead and pointing at individual people, but you mentioned Bruce and Ellie Orr. If I was in their position, I would at this moment in time definitely be consulting with my lawyers. Let me put it like that. Because when we now get to the actual story here that this Real Clear Investigations article has, and it's clearly very well informed and very well sourced, and one of its primary sources is this individual, Sergei Millian. Now, Sergei Millian is a Belarusian who lives in the United States. He has US citizenship. He set up and runs something called the Russian-American Chamber of Commerce, which is in fact not to be connected with the US Chamber or the Russian Chamber of Commerce. This is a private operation that he runs. He was also a very strong and open Donald Trump supporter. Now, what seems to have happened, in fact, not seems to have happened, what apparently happened is that this group of people, and Glenn Simpson is now increasingly looking as if he was the major ringleader and the orchestrator of all of this, but this group of people, Danchenko, perhaps Steele, certainly Glenn Simpson, and using Bruce Orr and Nellie Orr, Nellie Orr was Bruce Orr's wife, and she worked for Glenn Simpson at the same time that Glenn Simpson was working in the Justice Department. They appear to have been feeding this story to the FBI, to the Justice Department, that Millian, who is a completely innocent man, was a Russian spy. And that he wasn't just a Russian spy, but that he was the Russian spy in the United States who was running the alleged interference operation, the collusion operation, the American side of the collusion operation from within the United States, that he was keeping in contact with Donald Trump using this supposed Alpha Bank server, which was supposedly sending the information backwards and forwards, and that he was somehow masterminding the entire collusion operation. At the same time as he was doing all of that, he was supposedly leaking all the information about this collusion operation to Danchenko, who was then passing it on to the to Steele, who was writing up the dossier, and the dossier via Glenn Simpson and via Steele, but also to a great extent via Bruce and Nellie, or was finding its way to the FBI. So we see Millian being identified as both the Russian controller, the Russian controller of Donald Trump, the person who was managing this entire operation, this entire collusion operation in the US, the person who was in direct contact between Russian intelligence and Donald Trump and his campaign, and specifically Donald Trump here, and using this Alpha Bank server to pass information backwards and forwards, and Millian at the same time, at one and the same time, being the key source for all the information about that operation, which was finding its way into the dossier. None of that was true. All of that was entirely invented. It was completely fantasized, perhaps by Danchenko, possibly by the others too. I don't want to anticipate charges that are coming. But regardless, an entirely innocent man, a businessman, somebody who, so far as we can see, has no connection with Russian intelligence at all, somebody who was certainly not coordinating any sort of collusion operation with Donald Trump. He couldn't have done it because, of course, there was no collusion operation. That entirely innocent man was being framed in this way behind the scenes by Glenn Simpson, Igor Danchenko, Christopher Steele. We don't yet know to what extent all of these people were involved, and Bruce and Nellie all played an absolutely key role in passing all that information to the FBI. So we have the Steele dossier, which is bad enough, but it's clear that it was not just the Steele dossier that was being passed on to the FBI. Verbally, people like Simpson, Steele, and Danchenko, either directly in Steele's case or via Bruce and Nellie all, were passing this information verbally on to the FBI in order to keep this investigation, this phony collusion investigation going, and were pretending that the source was Millian and that Millian was Donald Trump's Russian controller.
Yeah, they targeted Millian in much the same way that they targeted Carter Page. They seem to have had these people picked out beforehand, whose lives they're going to ruin and who they're going to smear with these lies. Really just sinister stuff. So, I mean, if you had to outline everything, I think it's worth noting, by the way, I don't know if you mentioned it, but Bruce Orr was working for the FBI while his wife was working for Glenn Simpson.
Yeah.
And I guess Bruce Orr would be reporting directly to someone like McCabe and then going up to Comey. I would imagine that would be, McCabe or Comey obviously would be his direct superior. So
I think it's actually worse than that, because as I understand it, Bruce Orr actually was working in the Justice Department. He was in a kind of a way not exactly superior to McCabe and co, but in a position where he was able to arrange for them to be given instructions. So he was in a very, very powerful position indeed. So he was being fed information by his wife, Nellie, and was transmitting it downward into the FBI.
Right.
And obviously was working.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And was actually, I mean, to my mind,
that was a top justice official. He was passing it on to the FBI.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay. So that makes it look even worse. Doesn't acquit the FBI at all, by the way. The FBI were fully in a position to find out the truth, and they ultimately did find out the truth, and continued with the investigation after they found out the truth. And by the way, long after they found out that Millian was completely innocent, they allowed stories to continue to spread and appear in the media, including the Wall Street Journal and other places, which made it look as if he was guilty of something. So, I mean, it was utterly, utterly cynical, utterly callous, a totally innocent man, identified as a Russian spy, woven into this story of collusion, given a role, an outsized role as a controller, which is completely fictitious, apparently for no other reason than because he is somebody who is an open admirer and supporter of Donald Trump. That's all. That was all that Millian ever did, but it was enough to put him in the frame and to have this whole fantasy constructed around him. Now, I have to say that, the more we learn about Russiagate, the worse it gets. I mean, this was not a sort of Laurel and Hardy operation, as I at one time thought it was, with Steele getting, Danchenko getting information from his drinking buddies, which then Steele works up into some fantasy, which is then peddled to the FBI, which falls for it. It looks, on the contrary, like an extremely sinister attempt to weave a fictitious story, a tapestry of lies, essentially, which had a specific victim, and I call him a victim, which is Sergei Millian, who obviously had his reputation destroyed and was put in an incredibly precarious position where he might have found himself, he undoubtedly did find himself, under investigation, almost certainly under surveillance, and could very well have been put in a very precarious and dangerous position where he might have had, say, his citizenship revoked and perhaps, been deported, or who knows what might have been done to him. I'm going to add one other thing, which is, of course, that I've spoken about how Durham has got two grand juries operating, which is, it seems to me, quite astonishing, and it shows how huge this investigation is becoming. So all that we said about Durham being this invisible man and how this looked like a token investigation, it's increasingly looking as if this isn't correct at all. But I would point out he's now gone for Danchenko on these charges of lying to the FBI. If Danchenko is convicted of that and sent to prison, well, he will serve a sentence. But remember, he is a Russian citizen. Now, at the end of that prison term, I presume he would be deported back to Russia by the United States. Now, the Russians are following all of this. They've suffered very heavily as a result of all these lies. So they will want to speak to Danchenko if he is ever returned to Russia, if he's ever deported back there. And I wonder whether Danchenko looks forward to that happening and whether he might be especially nervous about being deported back to Russia. And I wonder whether that might put him under even more pressure to flip, because that's the way it looks to me, as the way that Durham is going.
Danchenko's going to flip. I'll put money on. If I was a betting man, I would bet that Danchenko flips, and I bet you he's already flipped and he's already talking. That would just be my bet. But definitely, I agree with you. I think that these people, the people that were constructing Russiagate, they actually sat down and said, we're going to target Page, we're going to target Millian, we'll target Papadopoulos. I think they just saw them as just collateral damage.
Absolutely. As
they were moving to destroy Trump. So they didn't really care that these were people with lives and families and careers. They didn't care. For them, they were just, collateral damage in our targeting of Donald Trump. So, I mean, it's absolutely awful. So, yeah, my bad on Bruce Orr. So Bruce Orr was working with the DOJ, feeding to the FBI. So Strzok, McCabe, Comey. So he was feeding the FBI, but that's the DOJ of Rosenstein. So Rosenstein, not Comey, Rosenstein was Bruce Orr's direct superior. Absolutely. So I mean, it just got worse if that's the case, because not only are you talking about the FBI and their connection to Simpson and to Steele and Danchenko, it's actually Simpson, Steele, Danchenko, FBI, plus Simpson, Steele, Danchenko, DOJ, and Rosenstein. And we all remember the role that Rosenstein played in all of this with his signature on all kinds of papers.
Absolutely, that's entirely correct. That's totally right. Now, but just take a step back and think what would have happened if Hillary Clinton had won the election. Okay, if Hillary Clinton, as everybody had expected, had won the election in 2016, well, probably all these investigations would have been closed down by the new Attorney General, who might have been Merrick Garland, or it might have been Rosenstein, or somebody like that. I mean, it's entirely possible it could have been Rosenstein, but it could have been someone else. They would have closed down the investigation. Glenn Simpson, Steele, Danchenko, and whoever else was involved. And remember, we've had a massive cast of characters provided in the indictment by Durham in a way that suggests that some of these people might be subject to investigation and possible indictment themselves. They'd have been able to walk away, and that would have been the end of it. Except, of course, that somebody like Millian might have found his citizenship taken from him and sent back to Russia, or sent to Russia, or something like that. But what happened was that Trump won, and at that point they were in real trouble, because of course they had all these investigations going, and of course the FBI at that point was required to try to verify all of these sources and corroborate all of these sources. So they call in Danchenko, who is the primary source, for questioning. And Danchenko then spins them this yarn that, of course, this wasn't really intended seriously, that the Steele dossier wasn't meant entirely seriously, that he got all the information from his drinking buddies, and all those sort of things. Whereas, in fact, as I said previously, they were suggesting that it was Sergei Millian who was the source. And I've already said that this Danchenko story looks like a cover story put together by the whole group of them. They're trying to distance themselves from this operation, which they had previously hatched. In other words, it's a cover story intended to distract the FBI. Now, the FBI, who I'm pretty sure all along figured out exactly what was going on. I mean, I don't believe for a moment that the FBI, with all its resources, doesn't know enough about Glenn Simpson and enough about Christopher Steele and all of these people to figure out exactly who they were, exactly who they were working for, exactly what they were up to. The FBI seems to go along with this cover story that Danchenko and the others are spinning, except, of course, that things still get out of control, and you get, firstly, the Mueller investigation, which, as I said, keeps this thing alive because that's what the Democrats want. And also you get the investigation by Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the FBI. And also there's the congressional probes launched by people like Nunes in the House and Grassley in the Senate. And what we've seen is that this cover story that Danchenko tried to spin, as a result, has crumbled. Mueller couldn't prove the collusion allegation because, of course, as I said, it was a fiction. Horowitz established that the FBI knew at a very early stage, back in 2017, that the whole collusion allegation was a hoax. Nunes and Grassley began to get to the bottom of some of the facts, like the fact that Millian was an innocent man. And now Durham is putting all the pieces together. So it's taken a while for us to get here, but you could see how this elaborate confection is now falling apart. Both the original collusion allegation, and we now see how sophisticated it was. We understand the role that the Alpha Bank server was supposed to play. It was supposed to be the communications line between Millian, Trump, Moscow, all of this sort of thing. We're beginning to see how all of that worked. And we also see how the cover-up, which was spun after the election, how that was supposed to work also. It's all very sinister and really very troubling. And as I said, it doesn't stop at Danchenko, Glenn Simpson, Christopher Steele, the Oars. It must surely go above them. Firstly, to the lawyers, Perkins Coie, and, well, we know who's above Perkins Coie.
Yeah, to wrap it up, we do know who's above Perkins Coie, that's for sure. All roads lead to HRC. maybe Bill as well. Who knows? But, to close up this video, to wrap it up, they could have stopped everything. They were hoping that Hillary would win. She didn't win. So they could have just stopped everything and just let it go once Trump won in 2016 and said enough's enough. We tried to smear him. We tried to do this Russia thing to a certain point. Let's let it go. He won. It's over. Let's look towards 2020. No. They said no. We're going to double down. We're going to take out Flynn. We're going to ruin this man's presidency. And we're going to send Comey into the Oval Office, for lack of a better word. Maybe this word is a little harsh. Maybe it's not. To scare Trump, to try and I don't want to say blackmail, even though I said it, but or extort, to frighten him. Maybe a tactic that they use often. Maybe this is the tactic that they use all the time, and it works all the time for Comey to say, well, we got this dossier, Mr. President, and here it is, but I won't publish it, unless you play ball with us. I'm paraphrasing. But Trump did something that they never expected. He said, screw this, no, and he fought back.
Yeah.
And that's when Trump derangement syndrome got to them, because instead of, once again, letting it go and saying we tried to get him to play ball like we do with every other politician and it works by, trotting out certain information that we have about them, or even fake information that we have about them, he decided not to play ball. So they could have let that go too, Alexander, but they didn't. Instead, they doubled and tripled down. And want to know what they said in their ego and in their hubris? They said, "Oh, he thinks he can rule. He thinks he can take us on. No, we'll destroy him." And it kept on escalating and escalating. And like I said, as it escalated, then you had people like Nunez who said something doesn't feel right, or Grassley, or Jim Jordan, or Durham, or all these people, Fox News. Let's not forget Laura Ingraham, Hannity, Tucker Carlson, all these people in Fox News that said, wait a minute, something's not right. Mueller's not who he says. They just kept on escalating. The derangement syndrome, the ego, the hubris got to them, and they said, we're going to ruin this man. And it looks like they're going to be the ones that are going to get ruined Absolutely. At the end of the day. Maybe.
Absolutely.
We'll let it play out.
I will just add one important person to that list of people who were the skeptics, and that's Michael Horowitz, the Inspector General of the FBI, apparently very much a liberal, a person who is on the left, but an honourable and decent man, and somebody who did his job properly. Can I just say something, Alex? What you said is absolutely right. If after the election they had just stopped, that would have been the end of it. But I'm going to say something else, and this I know from experience because I've seen this so many times. People in that who do these sort of things, they don't know when to stop. They become both angry and frightened, and that's why they double down. And it's by doubling down that they eventually reveal themselves. And it's classic. Many, many criminals do this. They go back and they try to cover the traces. They try to sort of concoct more stories, and they just lose control of what they're doing. So this is actually a classic example of the kind of mistakes they make. The FBI needed to cover up, so they persisted in speaking to Danchenko. When you talked about blackmail, when you talked about Comey and meeting Trump, well, Donald Trump is known to have thought that Comey was trying to blackmail him. He's been blackmailed apparently in the past in the kind of business world that he does, it's unsurprising if you know anything about the construction business. So he's used to it, and that's what he saw about it. And of course, then after that failed, what does Comey do? He carries out surveillance of Trump, because that's what it was. He has all these meetings with Trump. He goes away, he writes up detailed notes of everything that he says about Trump, tries to make them as sinister as possible, leaks them to the media via an intermediary. I mean, completely incredible stuff. I mean, violates FBI rules by doing that, because these notes that he's taking as FBI director are not his to leak in that way, but that's what he does. And at the same time agitates to get a special counsel appointed, because of course he's trying to cover up his role. So all of these people, they can't let it go. They can't let it drop, because people who do these bad things, that's the kind of compulsion they always come under. And then in the end, that's what gives them away.
Yeah. We just named two concrete examples of when they could have just walked away after the election and after the Comey meeting. You know, to his fairness, Trump never gave any indication that he would go after anybody when he won election. As a matter of fact, he made many speeches where he said, let's not call Hillary Clinton X, Y, and Z. It's over. I mean, he said it many times.
Absolutely.
You know, it's done, and that's that. So he never gave an indication that he was going to go after him. Yeah, he said drain the swamp, but I think Trump was thinking of drain the swamp much differently than going after Comey and McCabe and Rosen. I don't think that's what Trump meant when he said drain the swamp, is to go after these guys. Right.
He's not a vindictive man. Now, Byron York actually has actually written about this. He's done a very good book, which is one of the best books on Trump that's been written. It's a real book about Trump. The first thing he says is Trump is not vindictive. Trump likes to be liked by people. He tried to win Comey over. He was advised by people like Christie and others to sack Comey when he became president, and he kept Comey on. He let him remain FBI director because he thought he could win Comey over. It was a huge mistake, by the way, a major, major mistake. But absolutely, if they'd let it drop, he'd have let it drop. But of course, they didn't believe that. They were scared, and they pressed on. And they tried to destroy Trump in other ways because they were frightened that, if he was vindictive, if he was like they themselves were, he would, unleash the attack dogs and get to the bottom of it. And instead, all they did was that they compounded their own conspiracy fantasizing. And of course, they've now got themselves into far more worse trouble than they would have done if they'd done exactly what you said, if after the election they'd let it alone.
Yeah, you said the key phrase there. They thought that Trump would react the way they react. They thought because they're so vindictive and because they're so evil, they thought that once Trump won, he would do what they would have done if they were in his situation, if that makes any sense.
It makes absolute sense.
You know what I mean?
It makes absolute sense.
They're so twisted that they think everyone is evil and sinister like them.
Yeah, absolutely. That's exactly correct. That's absolutely right. I would also add, it explains a lot, as you rightly said, about Trump derangement syndrome. One of my favorite writers, Dostoevsky, once said that people always hate those they've wronged. These people knew the terrible things they'd done about Donald Trump, to Donald Trump, and to other people around Donald Trump, which is why they hated him. Because they hated him, because they feared him, and of course they went out to destroy him, because they couldn't bring themselves just to let it go and to bury the hatchet and to move on. And, well, there we are. What was already a big scandal and a terrible thing has now been made into a massive scandal and a far worse thing because they wouldn't let go. And let's not forget there are victims in this matter: Michael Flynn, Papadopoulos, Carter Page, all sorts of people. Millian, of course, absolutely. All of these people, as you rightly said, they were treated as collateral damage in a campaign to destroy Trump and to make Hillary Clinton, President of the United States.
Was that crime and punishment?
Crime and Punishment.
Dostoevsky quote?
It's Crime and Punishment.
They should have read that book.
It is well.
They should have read that
They
book.
should certainly have read that book. They
Should be required reading for all of all these guys.
They should have required reading for all of these guys because, of course, it shows actually that it's actually a classic example because, of course, what gives the murderer away in Crime and Punishment is his own uneasy conscience. He, as a result, is not able ultimately to retain control of the situation because, of course, always he has those doubts, insecurities, fears that he will be outed. And that's exactly that's happened to them. Only in the case in Crime and Punishment, the murderer, Raskolnikov, eventually has that moment of understanding and revelation. So he makes his confession. Bruce Orr, Glenn Simpson, Christopher Steele, and all the others never will.
Yeah. When I was in high school in the U.S., that was required reading. That was summer reading for us was Crime and Punishment. I guess that Comey and McCabe and Simpson and all these guys, I guess they didn't read that book when it was summer reading.
No,
they skipped over it.
Obviously not, despite the fact that Danchenko, as a Russian, ought to be particularly familiar with it, you'd have thought.
Maybe he skipped over it too.
Obviously.
All right. We'll leave it there. Go to the Duran.locals.com, everybody. Take care.